This week I'm looking at a trio of performance hatchbacks which are not Renaults. In the last instalment I featured the legendary Vauxhall Astra GTE 16 valve. However, if you still insist on buying French, you might want a 205. This, as you've probably noticed, is not a 205 because not everybody wants a 205. Personally, I've always much preferred the looks of the 306, a little bit more modern and a little bit of a better performer. However, if you want the best 306, of course it has to be the GTI. And if you want the best GTI, it needs to be the GTI 6. And if you want the very best GTI 6 as a driver, then you want the Rallye. It seems painfully obvious, doesn't it? When you've got a car and you introduce a new model which has less in it, you charge less for it. And yet nowadays, wherever you're likely to see a lightweight, stripped out special, manufacturers are almost certainly going to charge you more. Now, granted, that's usually because they've made up for it in some way, usually with a smattering of carbon fibre or perhaps a little bit of engine tuning, something like that. But the recipe which created this 306 Rallye was rather simpler. You take the old Peugeot 306 GTI 6, strip out the aircon, the nice interior, all the other fripperies, and you're left with essentially all that you need for what is supposed to be a great hot hatch. And this isn't supposed to be just any old hot hatch, this is apparently one of the all-time greats. I'm normally the sort of person that will tell you to never place too much faith in the opinion of road testers when they're comparing cars having driven them a very long time apart. Memory is a cruel thing indeed, especially when you're talking about cars that you may have driven at very different points in time, on different roads, in different weather, and perhaps even in very different conditions. However, this last couple of days, I've driven some of the true all-time greats. The Renault Clio Williams, the 182 Trophy, Lancia Delta Integrale, the Vauxhall Astra GTE. So the 306 Rallye has got its work cut out. Now the first thing to notice about this car, of course, is the presence of that extra 6th ratio. In fact, even half a decade later, Renault was still putting only 5 ratios in the Clio. I will accept that this isn't really a car that I should compare directly with the Clio because it exists in a class above. This is more Megane sized, but the problem is, when I was trying to find what might be a direct rival for this, there wasn't a lot obvious. The Golf really was not in a good way in 1999, so this didn't really have too much competition. That being said though, it doesn't take too long to realise it is pretty good. The gearbox is not great. It's good enough, but it isn't brilliant. French gearboxes very rarely are, and while this is certainly not the worst I've ever driven, nor is it the best. Fortunately, there's quite a lot else about this package to more than make up for it. I've always loved the look of the 306. Don't know why, I just have. And at many points in the past I've considered buying one as a semi-classic daily. Maybe I will one day. The problem is, prices have gone up just a little bit too much for my liking. However, in comparison to some of the other stuff that we've been driving this last month, these are still downright affordable. You're probably going to need to spend at least 5 or 6 grand to find a half-decent Rallye now versus the 1,500 quid you could have got one for a few years ago. But even still, that's not a lot compared to what people are asking for, say, a fast Ford from the same time. That engine up front is nice and peppy. If you want to know the numbers, here they are. The red line is at just over 7,000 RPM, but thanks to a curb weight of 1,163 kilos, the car still feels relatively sprightly, even when you're at about, say, 2,000 or 3,000. You can heel and toe with relative ease, but the driving position is an odd one. These seats are not brilliant. They are a shortcoming of the car. And the engine, although effective, doesn't feel anywhere near as special as the Vauxhall Astra GTE that we've just got out of. but that really was a true homologation special of an engine, a race car unit for the road. It was wonderful, it was zingy, even if the rest of the car wasn't quite as good. The steering in this is very, very decent, nicely weighted, direct enough, and you could happily daily this car. Maybe in truth, these days you should probably just buy the GTI 6 and have the aircon put in. I think you might have been able to do that with the Rallye. Don't quote me on that though. The interior also feels, well, very low rent, but again, that was the point. If you wanted the nicer interior, you paid more for the nicer car. I think this was about £16,500 when it was new versus £18,500 for the full fat GTI 6. It does feel its age somewhat, this car, and even in 1999 this wouldn't have been really a cutting edge place to be. It wasn't the last 306, but it certainly wasn't the first either. Visibility is pretty good, as you expect with all cars like this. It's actually fairly comfortable too. Not even near as soft or plush as, perhaps surprisingly, the Escort RS Cosworth that I drove earlier this morning. But still, more than nice enough, especially if you've gotten used to modern things. Perhaps most surprisingly, this car is also completely standard. It's another one of the amazing vehicles loaned to me by the extremely generous Ben, and all he asks in return is that you give his Instagram a like and check out the pictures of his other cars there. It is at about 4,500 RPM or so where this engine really does start to come alive. It needs work, but it delivers, and it's got that response you get from an old school naturally aspirated lump. It's not the equal of the GTE, but it's a not distant second. Whenever I do reviews like this, choosing the road is always a very big part of it. And the great thing about older cars is that they take up so much less of it. I also had the option of driving something like a Nissan R35, and the truth is that, well, on these roads, it would be simply terrifying. Not in a good way. There's quite a bit of room in here, both up front, in the back, and in the boot. It would actually make a really great classic daily. You can even get parts for it, and this car's owner has recently replaced some of the trims, which you can buy direct from Peugeot at original quality and not silly prices. It's always nice to see manufacturers supporting their older cars. The unit used in this is an evolution of the 205 GTI's 1.9, so it can trace its roots back a fair way, but it doesn't feel out of date, even 20 years later. As you start to press on, the steering takes up a nice weighting, and you can feel that rear end start to play. I have been warned, this is another car that enjoys a bit of lift-off oversteer. It does feel like that engine really actually wants to give you a lot more as well. You start getting to 5,000 RPM, and I know it wants to keep going, but this would actually be one classic I'd be tempted to fettle a little bit. I want to get that engine breathing a little bit more. It doesn't run for the red line like the GTEs does. Bit of a shame, really. But it is a car where no one particular piece of it seems to stand out, and that is a very good thing, because a hot hatch should always be a car which is very balanced. The GTE was perhaps slightly imbalanced because the engine was so much better than the rest of it, and here everything kind of works together. The brakes work well enough, and maybe it's just a shame that that gearbox, the star of the package, is just okay. Alright, maybe it's better than the 5-speeder and the Clio and all that sort of jazz, but it just doesn't stand out as truly brilliant. Hey, can't win them all though. This is still a really very good car, and I wouldn't blame anybody that bought one to use, and I'd really advise that you do, while they're still remotely affordable. They're a huge amount of fun. Really, these are a proper modern classic. They are genuinely usable. This one's seen 65,000 miles, and I'm sure it'd happily see many more. It's actually quite well put together in here. Nothing's creaking or rattling. As a package, I like it. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.